Congratulations. You've been sent back in time. The year is 1320. You're standing in a muddy field in rural England. You're wearing something that might generously be called a shirt. Your shoes are gone. Actually, you never had shoes. You're a medieval peasant. And buddy, it's about to get rough. See, when most people imagine the Middle Ages, they think of knights and castles and dramatic sword fights. And yeah, those existed. But those people were like the top 2% of medieval society. The other 98%, that was you, standing in mud, wondering if the turnips would grow this year, because if they didn't, you'd starve. Not metaphorically, actually starve. So let's walk through your entire life as a medieval peasant, from birth to death. Every miserable, hilarious, and surprisingly human detail, because your life was short, hard, and smelled absolutely terrible. But it was also way more interesting than you think. Let's start at the very beginning. Your birth. It's already bad. You're born in a one-room house. There is no hospital. There is no doctor. There's a local midwife, a woman from the village who has done this enough times to know what she's doing. Mostly. Sometimes. The success rate is, let's call it, hopeful. Your mother gives birth on a straw bed while your father is probably outside, because medieval men did not attend births. That was considered women's business. Your dad's job right now is to pace around and try not to think about the fact that roughly 1 in 3 babies doesn't survive their first year. 1 in 3. That's not a typo. Infant mortality in medieval England was somewhere between 30 and 50%, depending on the region and the decade. Disease, malnutrition, complications during birth. The medieval world was basically a gauntlet, and you hadn't even opened your eyes yet. But let's say you make it. You survive. Congratulations, you get a name. And you don't get to pick it. The church has opinions. Strong opinions. You're getting a saint's name. John, William, Thomas, Agnes, Alice, Margaret. Your parents aren't naming you after their favorite fictional character. They're naming you after whoever's feast day was closest to your birth, because the church said so, and the church says a lot of things around here. Your mother, by the way, is back in the fields within days. There is no maternity leave. There is no leave of any kind. There is only the field, and it needs plowing. Your childhood, which is not a childhood. Here's something that will sound insane to modern ears. The concept of childhood, as we understand it, basically didn't exist in the medieval period. The historian Philippe Aries argued that medieval society saw children as miniature adults. Now, that's been debated and refined by later historians. Medieval parents absolutely loved their children, but the practical reality was clear. You start working around age 5. 5 years old. Not hard labor. Not yet, but you're helping. You're scattering crows away from the crops. You're gathering eggs. You're fetching water. By 7 or 8, you're doing real agricultural work alongside your parents. By 12, you're basically a full farmhand. School? What school? Unless you're being sent to a monastery, and you're not, because you're a peasant, there is no school. You can't read. You can't write. You will never learn. About 95% of the medieval peasant population was illiterate. The Bible, the law, the tax records, all written in Latin, a language you don't speak. Everything you know about the world comes from your parents, your village priest, and whatever rumors drift in from the nearest market town. You might have toys. Archaeology has turned up carved wooden horses, small dolls, leather balls. Children played. They ran around. They threw things at each other. Medieval kids were still kids. They just also had to work a full agricultural shift. Your diet. Bread and sadness. Let's talk about food. Because you're going to be eating the same thing every single day for your entire life. Pottage. Pottage is a thick soup, or more accurately, a thick slop, made from whatever vegetables you have. Onions, cabbage, leeks, beans, peas, some herbs. You throw it all in a pot over the fire. You cook it. You eat it. Tomorrow you cook more. The day after that you cook more. For decades. Your bread is dark rye or barley bread, not the nice, crusty artisan bread you're imagining. This bread is dense, heavy, and sometimes mixed with whatever grain was available, including, in bad years, ground acorns or even bark. Your bread could literally break your teeth, and it often did. Medieval skeletons show horrific dental wear. Your teeth are grinding down from years of eating grit that got into the flour from the stone mill. Speaking of mills, you can't grind your own grain. You must use your Lord's mill, and you must pay for the privilege. This is called suit of mill, and it is one of the many ways your Lord extracts money from you for doing basic survival tasks. Imagine if your landlord owned the only microwave and charged you every time you heated up leftovers. That's medieval milling. You drink ale, lots of ale. Not because you're a party animal, but because the water might kill you. Untreated water sources were frequently contaminated, and people figured this out pretty quickly. Ale was boiled during brewing, which killed off a lot of the nastiness. So everyone drank ale. Men, women, children. Your 5-year-old is drinking ale. It was weaker than modern beer, but still, the medieval world ran on low-grade alcohol. Meat. Rarely. You might have a pig. You might have chickens. But meat was expensive and mostly reserved for feast days. And whatever you do not touch the Lord's deer. Poaching from the Lord's forest was a crime punishable by mutilation or death. That deer belongs to him. That rabbit belongs to him. Those fish in the river, his. The forest itself, also his. You live surrounded by food you're not allowed to eat. Your house, one room, shard with animals. Your home is a single-room structure. The walls are wattle and daub, a lattice of wooden strips plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. Yes, your walls are partially made of poop. The roof is thatched with straw or reeds, which is great insulation, but also a fantastic home for insects, mice, and the occasional bird. The floor is dirt, packed earth, maybe covered with rushes or straw that you replace occasionally. Underneath those rushes is a layer of spilled food, animal droppings, and general filth that the Dutch scholar Erasmus later described in the 16th century, but about conditions that hadn't changed much, as an ancient collection of beer, grease, fragments, bones, spittle, excrement of dogs and cats, and everything that is nasty. Your pig might live inside with you. Your chickens definitely do. Animals were valuable, and keeping them inside protected them from theft and cold. So you're sleeping in the same room as your livestock. The smell is exactly what you're imagining. In the early medieval period, there might not even be a chimney, just a fire pit in the center of the room with a hole in the roof for smoke to escape. It doesn't work very well. Your house is perpetually smoky. Your eyes burn. Your lungs burn. Medieval peasant skeletons frequently show signs of chronic respiratory disease. Furniture, minimal. A table, a bench, maybe a chest for storage. Your bed is a straw mattress on a wooden frame if you're doing well, or just straw on the floor if you're not. Blankets are precious. Privacy doesn't exist. Your job. Sunrise to sunset. Every single day. You're a farmer. That's your job. That's your father's job. That was your grandfather's job. That will be your children's job. Social mobility in the feudal system is basically zero. You farm using the open field system. The village land is divided into large fields, and each field is divided into long, narrow strips. You don't own one nice rectangular plot. You own scattered strips across multiple fields. This sounds inefficient, and it was, but it also meant that good and bad soil was distributed somewhat fairly among the villagers. The three-field rotation system keeps the land productive. One field grows wheat or rye. One grows barley, oats, or legumes. One lies fallow, resting for a year. They rotate annually. This is actually pretty clever agricultural science, and it kept the soil from being completely depleted. Your plow is heavy and pulled by oxen. You probably don't own enough oxen yourself. A full plow team was 8 oxen, and almost no individual peasant could afford that. So you share with your neighbors. This creates a complicated web of social obligation and occasional arguments that would make a modern homeowners association look relaxed. But here's the real kicker. You don't just farm your land. You farm your lord's land first. This is the corvée, unpaid labor service. 2 or 3 days every week, you work the lord's demesne fields for free, before you can even touch your own crops. And during harvest season, you might owe even more labor days. You work from sunrise to sunset. In summer, that's 16 hours. 16 hours of back-breaking physical labor with hand tools. In the weather, whatever the weather is, your lord's demons. You owe everything. Let's talk about what your lord takes from you, because the list is long and it is infuriating. First, labor dues. The corvée we just mentioned. 2 to 3 days per week of free labor on the Lord's land. Second, rent. You pay rent on your own land, land your family has farmed for generations. You pay in money, in grain, or in both. Third, tithes. 10% of everything you produce goes to the church. Not the Lord, the church. This is separate. This is on top of everything else. Fourth, tallage. A tax the Lord can levy basically whenever he feels like it. Bad harvest. Tallage. Lord needs to fix his castle. Tallage. Lord's daughter is getting married. You're paying for the party. Fifth, Hiriot. This is the death tax. When you die, the Lord takes your best animal. Your family just lost their father and their best ox in one day. Sixth, merchant. You want to get married. You need the Lord's permission, and you pay a fee for it. Your daughter wants to marry a man from another manor. That fee just got bigger because the Lord is losing a worker. Seventh, suit of mill, suit of oven. You must use the Lord's mill to grind your grain. You must use the Lord's oven to bake your bread. You pay for both. You can't build your own. It's illegal. You also can't leave the manor without permission. If you're a villein, the most common type of unfree peasant, you are legally tied to the land. Not a slave, exactly. You can't be bought and sold as an individual, but you come with the land. If the Lord sells the manor, you go with it. Like furniture. The Lord, of course, doesn't do any of this work himself. He has a steward, a bailiff, and a reeve. The reeve is usually a peasant himself, elected by the village, which means one of your neighbors is now the guy who makes sure you pay up. Imagine your buddy Dave suddenly having the power to fine you. Your social life. Actually, not that bad. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. Because despite everything I just described, medieval peasants were not joyless robots grinding through existence. They had fun. Quite a lot of it, actually. The medieval calendar was packed with holidays. Saints' days, feast days, holy days. The church mandated roughly 50 to 80 days off per year, depending on the region and period. That's more vacation than most modern Americans get. Way more. On these days, you didn't work. You went to church in the morning, and then you partied. Village alehouses were the medieval equivalent of the local pub. Women called alewives brewed and sold ale from their homes. You'd gather with your neighbors, drink, gossip, complain about the Lord, and tell stories. These gatherings were the backbone of medieval social life. Festivals were wild. May Day involved dancing, drinking, and a maypole. Harvest festivals celebrated the end of the brutal growing season with feasting and games. The Feast of Fools, yes, that was real, was a day where normal social hierarchies were temporarily inverted, and a peasant might be crowned Lord of Misrule. Sports existed. Medieval football was played between entire villages, with goals that could be miles apart. There were almost no rules. Injuries were common. The game was banned multiple times by various kings because it was causing too many broken bones and too many riots, which honestly just made it more popular. Wrestling, archery contests, bowling, cockfighting, bear baiting, medieval entertainment was rough but enthusiastic. And love, romance, absolutely. Peasants married for practical reasons, combining land, forming alliances between families, but evidence from court records, poetry, and church complaints suggests they also married for affection. The church complained constantly about peasants engaging in premarital activities, which means peasants were constantly engaging in premarital activities. Your health. Pray. Medical care in the medieval period was, well, let's call it creative. If you got sick, your options were limited. There were no trained doctors in your village. The nearest physician was in a city, charged astronomical fees, and was working from ancient Greek medical theory that was confidently wrong about almost everything. You might see a barber surgeon. This was a man who cut hair and performed surgery with the same tools. He might pull your rotten teeth, set a broken bone, or drain an abscess. He was not gentle, and there was no anesthesia beyond getting you drunk. More likely, you'd go to the local wise woman or healer who used herbal remedies. Some of these actually worked. Willow bark contained salicin, a precursor to aspirin, and various herbs had genuine medicinal properties. Others were less effective. Wearing a dead frog around your neck to cure a fever did not, in fact, cure a fever. The big killers were the ones you couldn't fight. Dysentery, typhoid, tuberculosis, smallpox, and then, in 1348, the Black Death arrived and killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. Your village might lose half its people in a single year. Entire families wiped out. Fields left unharvested because there was no one alive to harvest them. The average life expectancy was around 30 to 35 years, but this number is misleading. It's dragged down by that massive infant mortality rate. If you survived to age 21, you had a reasonable chance of reaching 50 or even 60. You'd be worn out, toothless, and bent from decades of labor, but alive. Your legal prides. Almost none, but not zero. Here's something that surprises people. Medieval peasants had legal standing. Not much, but some. The manor court, called the hallmote, met regularly to settle disputes. Peasants could sue each other over land boundaries, unpaid debts, damaged crops, or insults. Yes, insults. Medieval court records are full of cases where one peasant called another peasant a worthless churl, and the insulted party demanded justice. You could, in theory, even bring a complaint against the lord's officials, though good luck winning that one. The distinction between villeins and freemen mattered enormously. Freemen paid rent but weren't bound to the land. They could leave, marry freely, and own property outright. Villain had far fewer rights, but even villains had some protections under custom. The lord couldn't just do whatever he wanted. Customary law, enforced by tradition and village memory, set limits on fees, labor dues, and punishments. And there were ways out. If a villain escaped to a chartered town and lived there for a year and a day without being caught, they became legally free. A year and a day. That's it. Many peasants did exactly this, especially after the Black Death, when labor was scarce and towns were desperate for workers. Your death. And your lord still takes a cut. You're going to die younger than you'd like. Maybe in your 40s or 50s if you're lucky. Your body is wrecked from decades of physical labor. Your teeth are gone. Your joints are ruined. Your lungs are damaged from years of breathing smoke in your chimneyless house. When you die, the church handles your burial. You're placed in the churchyard in a simple shroud. Coffins were expensive and usually reused. The priest says the rites. Your family mourns. And then the Lord Steward shows up, because Heriot is due. Your best animal, probably your ox, possibly your cow, goes to the Lord. Your family just lost their primary worker and their most valuable possession in the same week. Your widow might keep the land if she remarries quickly. Your son might inherit, but only if the Lord approves. The cycle begins again. Your children will farm the same strips, eat the same pottage, pay the same tithes, unless the Black Death comes. And it did. In 1348, the plague killed so many people that the entire economic system broke. Suddenly, there weren't enough peasants. For the first time in centuries, your labor was valuable. Wages rose. Peasants demanded better conditions. Some left their manors entirely and hired themselves out as free laborers. The lords panicked. In 1351, the English Parliament passed the Statute of Laborers, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. It didn't work. Peasants kept demanding more. In 1381, it all exploded. The peasants' revolt. Led by Wat Tyler and inspired by the radical preacher John Ball, tens of thousands of peasants marched on London. They burned tax records. They stormed the Tower of London. They killed the Archbishop of Canterbury. John Ball stood before the crowd and asked one of the most famous questions in English history. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? The revolt was eventually crushed. Wat Tyler was killed. The king's promises were broken. But the genie was out of the bottle. Serfdom declined steadily over the next century. By 1500, it was effectively gone in England. The medieval peasant's life looks miserable by modern standards. And in many ways it was. The backbreaking labor, the exploitation, the disease, the constant threat of famine. It was a hard existence. But these people built the entire medieval world. They fed the kingdoms. They raised the churches. They plowed the fields that made everything else possible. Every castle, every cathedral, every crusade was funded by peasant labor. And when they'd finally had enough, they marched on London and demanded to be treated like human beings. If you survived this video, you're already tougher than most medieval lords ever gave you credit for. Hit subscribe if you want more history that your school never taught you. And next time, we're covering the insane punishments medieval people faced for breaking laws that shouldn't have existed. See you there.